Hi there, hope your day is going well. Thank you for allowing me into your day for just a few moments. You know, while it is true that as people we are all amazingly distinct and unique and completely different people, it's also true that just by virtue of being people, there are a whole lot of commonalities that we share that are just part of the human experience. For example, one of the things that's true of all people, whenever it is that they will live, wherever they have lived, is that we are emotional beings, that we, put another way, that we have feelings, that we are feeling people. Now, that's really good because it's the feelings, it's the emotions that we experience that not only add spice to our lives, but in many ways help us to discover the things that really matter and are most important. For example, think of what human relationships would be like, human interaction would be like if we had no capacity to know, to experience, and to feel love. Now, while it is true that emotions are an amazing gift from God in terms of how it is that He's wired us, they're also a double-edged sword because sometimes they can get out of bounds. Our emotions, our feelings can run amok. And when that happens, we get into and we can create some real trouble. Trouble for ourselves and trouble for others. Thankfully, God has given us in His Word some principles and truths that if we pay attention to them, they will help us keep our feelings in check. That's what I want to be thinking about starting today in a new devotional series that I'm calling Emotions, Keeping Your Feelings in Check. And as we do that today, I want to start with the emotion or the feeling or the experience of fear. And you know, we all experience fear. In fact, God has wired us to experience fear. In many ways, that's a real positive because it causes us, when we experience fear, to experience a state of alertness and caution that otherwise we might not. For example, just the other night, Caroline and I were walking in our neighborhood, and as we were making our way back closer to the house, we noticed off in the distance one fox, and then we saw another fox, and then a third fox, and they were calling out to each other, and as we were moving, they were kind of progressing with us, and I'm not going to lie, both of us were a bit on edge. We were experiencing some fear, but on the positive side, that caused us to be very alert, more vigilant than otherwise we might have been. That's a good thing. That's part of how God has wired us. But what I believe He wants us to do is to keep that in check so that while we may experience moments of fear, He doesn't want us to live in fear. And that's a very different thing. Some of you who may be watching this today, if pressed and if honest, you may say, yeah, I've been kind of living and am living in a state of fear. For some of you, it could be because of this COVID-19 epidemic, maybe sincerely that you are every day living in fear that you might catch this. For others, you've been watching the stock market as with all of its ups and downs, and you've been living in fear about your economic future and whether it is that you're going to be able to retire when you thought you were going to. For others, it could be more personal or relational, that you're living regularly in a state of fear, wondering, am I ever going to find that special person that God has for me? Am I ever going to find love and to experience the family that I so long and desire to be able to have and to experience? Listen, again, I believe that God doesn't want us to cause fear to go away, that we never experience it, but I do believe sincerely that He doesn't want us to live in that. So how can we guard against living in fear? I want you to join me in Romans chapter 8 for just a moment. And in Romans chapter 8, Paul says this starting in verse 15. He says that you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. Instead, you received the spirit of adoption by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. Now, he says a lot more in context there, but we have just time to think about those couple of verses. And bear in mind that these are words, these are truths that are directed specifically to people who have a relationship with Christ. And if you're someone who has a personal relationship with Jesus, you are someone who ought not and has absolutely no reason whatsoever to live in fear. So, with that in mind, and based on what we've said, let me just share with you a couple of principles. And the first is this. Fear is rooted in the unknown. Fear is rooted in the unknown. If, for example, I am walking down the hall and you jump out of a room and yell boo, you're going to scare me. I'm going to experience fear. Why? Because I didn't know that you were there. Now, by the same token, if I were watching a scary movie, but it's the 10th time that I've seen it, I'm probably not going to experience any fear. I'm not going to be scared. Why? Because I know what is going to happen. When we experience and when you experience fear, it is because by nature, fear is rooted in uncertainty. And there is so much that we don't know. With respect to the future, essentially everything that we do not know. Now, in preparation for this, I was thinking about fear and what its opposite would be. Now, a lot of times it's easy to identify, for example, the opposite of cold is hot, the opposite of light is dark, but what's the opposite of fear? Well, if fear is rooted in that which is unknown, the opposite of it must be rooted in that which is known. Well, if that's the case, I suppose the opposite of fear would have to be confidence. And that leads me to the second principle, which is this. And really the foundation for keeping fear in check in my life and in yours is this. Focus on the one who knows. Focus on the one who knows. In my life and in your life as a believer, who's that? It's to focus on the Lord. What do I not know about the future? Everything. What does He know about the future? Everything. Pay attention again to what Paul says in Romans chapter 8. Again, to believers, he says that you didn't receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. Those of you who would admit to, even if it's present or in the past, where you have lived in seasons of ongoing fear, it very much probably felt like enslavement or bondage. But he's saying to believers, you didn't receive from God this opportunity to fall back into that. Instead, he says that you have received the spirit of adoption, which gives you the ability, he says, to cry out, Abba, Father. Now, the word that's used there, Abba, is an Aramaic word. It would, I suppose, the closest example or the closest parallel in English would be daddy. And so, like, for example, if my kids were to reference me, if they called me Father, that sounds a little more formal, a little more staid, less intimate than, for example, Daddy. Daddy conveys warmth. Daddy conveys closeness. Daddy conveys this idea of approachability. If you're a follower of Jesus, that is the type of access that you have with God as your Heavenly Father. So that when there are things that may otherwise prompt or may be causing you to experience fear, the goal is that you cry out, Abba, Father, that you go to the one and that you redirect your focus to the one who knows what is going to happen. That you replace the fear of the moment or the fear of this season or the fear of the unknown by focusing on the one who does know, who does have everything under control, who knows exactly what is going to happen, and resting in the confidence that your Heavenly Father knows not simply what is going to happen, but He is going to guide you through and He is going to walk with you every step of the way of what it is that you encounter. As you do that, is that not very different than the experience for those of you who are parents, especially as you have had young children? When they experience fear or fright over something, what do? They come and they get in your lap and they say, Mama, Daddy, I am scared, or they start to cry. And what happens when they get to you, when they redirect their focus from that which is scaring them to you? Well, it leads them to relax. It leads them to take a deep breath. It doesn't lead them to know how everything is going to unfold. Rather, what it does is to lead them to focus on the one who, so long as they're with him, so long as they're with her, everything's going to be okay. They've got it under control. That's the same type of opportunity that you have, that I have as a follower of Christ. That those things that may spawn me to experience or even operate in a state of fear, I don't have to do that. So long as I realize that fear is rooted in the unknown, and then I focus on the one who knows, that I call out to, that I lean on, that I redirect my attention to my Heavenly Father. And somehow, some way, as I do that, the uncertainty, the apprehension, the tension, it begins to dissipate, and I experience the peace that comes from resting on and leaning on Christ. Listen, sincerely, I hope that helps you, whether it's now or in the future, because God has wired us to experience these emotions, but He wants us to keep them in check. God bless you and have a great rest of your day.